Vladimir Putin is 71 years old. He has ruled Russia for about a third of his life. He was president opposite Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, and now he wants another term.
Я буду баллотироваться на должность президента Российской Федерации.
The way Putin has gamed the system, he could run and win next year and then do it all again in 2030, which could mean he'd be president into his 80s. He could end up serving longer than Joseph Stalin did through the Second World War. And let's be clear, Putin will win re-election next March. But what could he lose in the process?
It would be a real mistake for people in the West to believe that this election is without meaning.
To understand Putin, you have to understand what gives him power.
Putin sits on top of a hierarchical structure. He is in control, but he is an autocrat, but he's not an absolute autocrat.
In Putin's world, he is undoubtedly the center. When he speaks, people listen. But his leadership hinges on his ability to control the chaos around him, starting with his inner circle. Senior government officials whose influence trickles through regional leadership and the parts of the official apparatus that everyday Russians see, hear, and absorb. On the intelligence side, Putin himself is former KGB. Loyalty from main intelligence, domestic intelligence, and foreign intelligence are critical for maintaining control. Perhaps the greatest direct threat to Putin's power, his own military. We've seen his forces rebel since the war in Ukraine started, and many experts believe Putin will continue to rule the country until either he dies or there's a coup. But there are also literally thousands of other powerful people within the country, the class of elites, people with real money and real agency. All of this, a complex and interconnected system that is often in a bitter struggle with itself for property and power. Putin's survival is based on keeping it all from spinning out of control.
He doesn't just get up in the morning and say, I think I'll do this, and magically it happens. It doesn't. He has to work this through factions, and sometimes he makes deals and makes compromises. At the end of the day, he's in charge, but he's not absolute.
Putin's strength is clear when you see how effectively he has appointed true loyalists to the most powerful positions around him. Let me show you something. So this is the Nezavisimaya Gazeta, a Russian daily newspaper. Every year, it publishes a ranking of the most politically influential Russians. Now, my Cyrillic is rusty from when I was in Russia about 10 years ago, but any guesses who takes the top spot? That says Putin Vladimir Vladimirovich. That last bit's his middle name, in case you didn't know. But scroll down the list, and you'll see how many of Putin's original appointees, people who've served him since he was elected in the year 2000, how many of them are still considered to be enormously influential some 20 years later. Sergei Ivanov, appointed by Putin as Minister of Defense, went on to become Chief of Staff, considered to be a core member of Putin's inner circle throughout his time in power. Dmitry Kozak, according to the Washington Post, on the day of the Ukraine invasion, he's the one who called Zelensky's administration directly, telling them to surrender. And very near the top of the list, Putin's number 2, Dmitry Medvedev. According to the George C. Marshall European Center for Security Studies, of the 12 people who first appeared on the list when Putin became president, all but one were still on the list 20 years later. In all that time, only 60 people have ever ranked 20th or higher, and 18 have appeared on every single list between 2000 and 2019. Depending on who you ask, the regime is either remarkably stable or in a state of political paralysis.
Loyalty, he has people around whom he trusts who have his interest at heart. The problem is competence, ability actually to run something or manage something effectively.
The war in Ukraine has not gone well for Putin. It is both the thing he hoped would strengthen his hold on Russia and now the thing that weakens it.
Ukrainian forces are inflicting very heavy casualties on Russia.
Russian forces by mid to late March achieved basically the maximum extent of advance they had in Ukraine up to this day.
This is Russian Defense Ministry video. So far, the UK Ministry of Defense estimates more than 300,000 Russian soldiers have died in this war. That's a lot of people in a war that has stretched on for nearly 2 years, that Putin thought could be won decisively within days, and that led to one of the more bizarre and spectacular direct challenges to Putin's authority we have ever seen.
Шойгу! Герасимов! Где боеприпасы?
This past summer, when the head of the Wagner mercenary group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, led an armed rebellion, a march on Moscow, the world very briefly wondered if Putin could survive such a challenge.
This is how the day began. In the Russian city of Rostov, armed men and armor on the streets.
7 часов 30 минут утра под контролем военные объекты Ростова, в том числе аэродром.
24 hours later, a kind of peace was brokered, but the damage to Putin's reputation was clear.
His weakness has been exposed, and so he is going to have to reassert himself in a way that demonstrates to the world and demonstrates to his country that he is fully in power.
2 months later, Prigozhin died in a plane crash. Putin also dismissed other senior military leaders whose loyalty he questioned, including close allies of Prigozhin, who commanded Russian fighting forces in Ukraine. But then, Ukraine began bringing the war to Russia. Suicide drones have been able to strike Russia from hundreds of kilometers away. Sea drones targeted a major Russian port. Numerous attacks have hit cities across the country, including Moscow. Even the Kremlin itself was targeted. From a Ukrainian Air Force spokesperson, there's always something flying in Russia as well as in Moscow. Now the war is affecting those who were not concerned. Ukraine believes Russian popular opinion is key to bringing the war to an end, and the coming election may be an opportunity to exploit that.
What bothers them about these electoral processes is that the election process itself may actually bring other complaints to light, particularly about the war.
Let me give you an example. According to Reuters, Russian military spending is set to go up 70% this year, with defense and security representing nearly half of what Russia will spend on its entire budget next year. I'll say again what I said at the start, that Putin will not lose next year's election. About 80% of Russians approve of his performance, according to the independent pollster Levada Center. Plus, the election itself is tightly managed.
He controls all the institutions responsible for the elections, the political parties, system of elections commissions on municipal, regional, federal level, then general prosecutor's office, courts, so mass media, he controls everything and everyone who is responsible for the elections.
The Putin regime approves or rejects all political candidates. The most serious challengers are either assassinated.
The body of Boris Nemtsov, a veteran Russian politician, longtime Putin foe, lay on the ground, 4 bullets in his back.
Or they live in exile.
Mikhail Khodorkovsky was once Russia's richest oligarch until Putin imprisoned him. Now he lives in exile here in London.
Or in the case of Alexei Navalny, brought within an inch of his life and then thrown in jail.
The poison that left Alexei Navalny screaming in agony on that flight over Siberia was assuredly a nerve agent, said the German doctors treating him.
Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny has just been found guilty and sentenced to 19 years in prison in his latest trial on extremist charges.
The media, completely under government control. The CBC and many other international media outlets were forced to close their bureaus after the start of the war, and Russian state TV dominates the conversation.
Да, мы справляемся и так. Укронацистов замочить и всех их ноунеймов и прочих жалких педерастов не проблема. Но для этой цели давайте использовать весь арсенал средств.
And to show you how swiftly Putin's real critics are silenced, when they recently bought a billboard ad that simply said Russia in big letters and S Novym Godom below it, Russian for Happy New Year, the QR code carried a secret message. It directed people to the Not Putin protest website. When the government realized what it was, it not only took the billboard down, it banned all QR codes on all billboards. There is a perpetual undercurrent of dissent that Moscow must continuously tamp down.
You should understand that realistically, Putin controls no more than 1/3 of the votes. Like his real electoral rating is something between, it's my estimation, it's 30-35%, no more.
On that point, consider that for the first time, voting will also happen next year in what Russia calls its new territories, parts of occupied Ukraine that Russia now controls. According to Russia's Central Election Commission, there will be voting in 4 regions: Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and Luhansk. And put yourself in the shoes of the people who live there. You're surrounded by war. Russian occupiers, an extension of Putin himself, they tell you it's election week. Which way would you vote? Ukraine says whatever results come of that will be null and void. But Russia doesn't see it that way.
Know that Putin will win the election. The question is how the election is won.
So where does that leave us? Well, again, the outcome of the election is not in question, but the exact result is.
In the eyes of those people, like, hey, previously you were drawing for yourself like 76% it was in 2018, the previous elections. And now you made 60. What's wrong? You're getting weaker.
They don't meet their targets. This will increase the competition among various Kremlin factions for power. It will tend to discredit Putin and lessen his ability to be an effective manager.
Whatever Putin's official target ends up being, exceeding it or falling short is highly symbolic. It shows how well Putin can mobilize ordinary Russians for an election that is otherwise meaningless. It also sends a signal to Russia's elites that Putin is still in charge. And consider this assessment from an American think tank, that even fraud will not erode Putin's prestige. To the contrary, it is yet another sign of his political dominance. Translation, even his ability to cheat says something about his influence. And making the results believable, not just to Russians, but to the international community, that's part art, part science, and all about